So the title of this podcast is Save or Die. And one of the things I want to look at, and we've been exploring under the general Wargaming tactics section of my YouTube channel here. Underneath the channel, I've broken up various playlists. I enjoy Warhammer 40,000, Battletech, X-Wing miniatures, Chain of Command, board games, historicals, DBA, DBN, Mordheim, board games, a couple other things here and there, Dungeons and Dragons. What they all have in common, and they do, dice. Dice and rules mechanics. There are certain core fundamentals of wargaming that are in play. Beyond the Gates of Antares too, although that's maybe I play once or twice a year working on that. Still, they utilize dice even if they're different types of activation dice in there. So with that, this idea of save or die, save versus die is in DIE, is in effect always. It's a core tactic. Let's explore it through this idea of Warhammer 40,000 and Battletech. Looking at that kind of fluency, looking at kind of that blueprint, and then understanding the concept and porting it over to your wargaming system. So the idea, we have these tactics in terms of special units and moving and shooting or maybe assault. But the idea is while our models are static and don't move, the dice represent probabilities. The dice represent the fog of war and the success factors in there. This idea of a dedicated, Chain of Command, a dedicated anti-tank weapon going up against a tank, the process of trying to destroy it, you have a fistful of maybe 8 to 12 D6s. And you roll them out, and on a 5 or a 6, that's going to score kind of an armor penetration point. That's going to cause a point. The armor that it's going against the tank is going to take a number of defense dice and roll them, and for every 5 and 6, that's a point that's blocked. So we're going to see, do I block everything, or just how much of this anti-tank round makes it through? And then we consult a chart to see what happens with the tank. Is there a shock to the crew? Is it on fire? Does it go boom and explode? But to simulate the different levels of tech, if we're talking World War II historicals, something like something like a Panzer III might have 8 armor. So I might roll 8 dice to try and block. But then we look at something like a Tiger II or some of the really heavily armored tank killers. They might have like 16 to 18 armor. So this idea of probability, we see this a little bit more simplified using a D6 system with Warhammer 40,000. The ballistic skill of your infantry. What do you need to hit? You hit on 3s, you hit on 4s, you hit on 5s. Are there circumstances where you hit on 6s? And you might get some modifiers here and there. But again, it represents kind of the skill level of the infantry and maybe the tech level that's pushed in there. So the first idea of understanding the dice is that if you want something to happen, good or bad, you need to generate the maximum amount of dice that are out there. So if I'm shooting, I need to have the maximum amount of dice. How do I do this? Well, big units, making sure that when I shoot, I can have all of my weapons in range. There might be units that have different weapon profiles on there, matching up all the possible dice. On the opposite side of Warhammer 40,000, save or die, I need you to fail armor saves. I need you to take wounds. I need to kind of break through those things. So there's a big difference if you have 5 Space Marines left and I'm hitting you and you got to make your save. If I hit you with make 3 saves on 5 guys, Math Hammer guys are going to be like, okay, I'll probably lose 1. Well, if I'm like, take 10 saves on your 5 guys, take 15 saves on your 5 guys, the luck of the dice, the fog of war is going to run out. So generally speaking, this idea of if I can leverage the most dice in there, that happens. Now let's look at it from the Battletech perspective. In Battletech, your mech, your war machine, has a bunch of armor bubbles for each location, external and internal. So your arms, your legs, your torso, your head. When the external armor bubbles get blown up, PPC or laser does 10 points of damage, 8 points of damage. A missile might do 5 points of damage on there. As you take damage, these armor bubbles kind of get stripped away. And then internally where the ammunition is, the motive systems of the mech, the fusion engine, the sensors, the gyros, all that type of stuff, internally can now start taking damage. So ideally, I want to get to the internals of your mech as quickly as possible and start blasting it up, chewing it up. High volume damage puts that out there. So obviously if I'm hitting you, damage in Battletech ranges anywhere from like 2 points all the way up to 20 points, or with some type of tech higher, but generally 2 to 20. So if we look at that save or die, well, I'm going to strip away that. So I want to shoot my powerful weapons and just blast away. But there's also a unique feature in Battletech to represent the fact that these machines are moving and there's weak spots in there or just the fog of war. There's a chance, first you have to hit, and then after you hit, based on the facing of the mech, where it's facing, you roll 2d6 on this chart. And if you roll 2, it's a center torso critical hit. So even though you haven't penetrated the armor, just that hit was straight on. That hit was perfect. There's a chance where it's going to mess up the internal damage. If you roll 2 6s, that's a headshot. There's not a lot of armor up on that head. And the mech warrior, the pilot, is in there. So they're going to have to take a consciousness check. They might be killed outright from the force of the hit. I mean, imagine this particle cannon that could level a building in one shot hits your mech right in the head. So 2s and 12s, bad. Everything else in there could be a leg, could be an arm, depending on the facing. So in understanding that, if I'm going up against this mech, Stalker, it's this type of kind of battle pod mech, lots and lots of armor. It's the type of mech that when you see it on the table, you don't want to admit it. You're doing the best you can to hide it. It's like seeing like a bunch of Primarchs on the table. You got some problems. So certainly I want to pound on it with my heavy weapons, but I want to be able to shoot everything that I possibly can to generate the volume of dice. So a machine gun in Battletech does minimal damage, like 2 points of damage, nothing, unless it's going against infantry, and then it absolutely just tears through them. So the idea is these mechs that carry machine guns, they're dedicated to dealing with infantry and light vehicles, because in Battletech, infantry can swarm you. If you've got infantry dug in, they've got missile launchers, they've got lasers. They're just a real pain. If they're out in the open, they're going to get squashed. But if they're dug in, if they're in a building, if they're in a fortification, unless you have a flamethrower or a machine gun, it's going to be hard to flush them out. So the thinking is with these mechs with machine guns early on is, okay, I'm going to apply that against infantry, but against the mech, what's it really going to do on there? 2 points of damage. Well, if I get a headshot, or if I get that double 1, 2 to the torso, possible for crit. So at that point in Battletech, what we start to see is, yes, the strategy is to strip off all the external armor and get to the internals, but the dice strategy also is to just hit you with everything that I possibly can, and based on the facing, you guys will crunch the numbers. I'm more of a chance and fate type guy. You roll 2 1s, a machine gun is more shots. A machine gun can do it. I've seen it happen. I've seen a single missile connect from an infantry unit and hit critical parts on these machines. Very unlikely, but that very unlikely becomes more probable the more dice you roll. So again, going back to this idea of save or die, dice theory, generally speaking, the more dice that I can roll, the more bad stuff is going to happen to you. And on the opposite end, if I'm trying to save myself, the less dice I roll, the better on there. So how can I cut down my opponent? If we're going back to Warhammer 40K, I don't want you getting up there and rapid firing and just unloading your whole dice pool on me. How the heck, how do I stay away? Or how can I keep you away? Battletech, likewise, unless it's like a dedicated long-range mech, like a longbow, how do I keep back until that moment on there? These are the back and forth questions. And again, we're just illustrating 40K, Warhammer 40,000, and Battletech as 2 games I enjoy. But any games involving dice are going to utilize these tactics. Bonus points, bonus question in the podcast. Apologies for mispronouncing this. I might be. A long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I started to play Malifaux on there. And I love the models. I love the setting. I was like, where's the dice, man? Where's the dice? What do you mean? It's like a deck of cards. It's cards to maneuver it on there. That's completely different. If you're utilizing something that's a card-based strategy, that's an entirely different war game in there.